In other words, by galactic standards, the most primitive possible combat training imaginable. The galactic equivalent of arriving at an artillery duel with a sharpened stick. This, I told Valura, saving the file and reaching for my commentary notes, is going to be the easiest match I have ever called. The staging area beneath the arena was a controlled storm of preparation when I arrived. Champions in various states of warm-up, support staff rushing between stations, medical personnel reviewing injury protocols, equipment technicians running last-minute calibrations. The smell, or rather the atmospheric cocktail, of 17 different species stress responses mingled into something thick and complex. Gormith dominated the space simply by existing in it. He stood near the far wall, surrounded by his delegation support team, every surface of his ceremonial combat plating polished to a reflective shine. He had brought 4 different backup weapons in addition to his primary arsenal, all of them secured in specialized cases that required 2 handlers each to carry. Crayon the silicate stood motionless in a corner, his mineral body refracting the overhead lighting into scattered prisms across the walls. He did not need equipment. His body was the equipment. Compound harder than most starship hull plating, density sufficient to shrug off impacts that would total an armored transport. I was cataloging these details for my pre-match commentary when I spotted her. Victoria Torres was standing near the tournament bracket display, reading the match schedule with the focused, unhurried attention of someone reviewing a restaurant menu. She was smaller than I had imagined, approximately 1.7 meters tall, perhaps 70 kilograms, with dark hair pulled back in a simple tie and brown skin that seemed to absorb the station lighting rather than reflect it. She wore flexible fabric, clothing designed for movement. Her feet were wrapped in soft footwear. Her hands and wrists were wrapped in athletic tape. That was the entirety of her equipment. Her eyes, when she finally glanced away from the bracket display and took in the staging area, were the detail that stayed with me. Dark and calm, they moved across the space with a quality I found difficult to immediately name. Not nervousness, not excitement, not the barely contained aggression I was accustomed to seeing in champions before a match. Something quieter and more complete. She was taking inventory, I realized. She was simply noting where everything was, who everyone was, cataloging the environment with the same natural ease that are being users when walking into a room they intend to stay in for a while. She did not look out of place. She looked like she had decided she belonged here, and had not yet found sufficient evidence to revise that decision. The other champions began noticing her arrival. The reaction rippled through the staging area like a stone dropped in still water. First glances, then stays, then laughter, the specific, barbed laughter of beings who are genuinely amused but also want to make certain the object of their amusement knows exactly what they think. Gormith's voice cut through the noise like a geological event. "Is this a joke?" he bellowed in Galactic common, turning to face the human with an expression of theatrical disbelief. Did someone's offspring wander in here by mistake? The laughter in the staging area doubled. One of the Zenthri twins made a comment in their native language that my translator rendered, somewhat inadequately, as something about humans being adorably misguided. Crayon simply stayed, his crystalline eyes refracting light in the pattern I had learned meant deep confusion. Victoria Torres heard all of it. I watched her register every word, every laugh, every pointed stare. She turned back to the bracket display and continued reading. I approached her with my recording drone hovering at my shoulder, already composing my opening lines. Pre-match interviews with the underdog were always good content. There was something universally resonant about watching someone cheerfully unaware of what they were walking into. "Excuse me," I said, making sure my translator was calibrated to English, Earth's most widely distributed language. "Victoria Torres? I'm Kardish, tournament commentator for the Galactic Combat Trials. Do you have a moment?" She turned to look at me. Up close, that quality in her eyes was even more pronounced. There was nothing performative about her expression, no effort to project confidence, no effort to conceal anxiety. She simply looked at me the way you look at someone who has asked a straightforward question. "Sure," she said. "Wonderful." I activated the recording drone. "So, this is your first appearance at the Galactic Combat Trials, representing Earth in what is, without question, the most prestigious combat tournament in the known Federation. How are you feeling about that?" "I feel fine," she said. I waited for elaboration. The silence extended for several seconds. Nothing came. "Right," I said. adjusting my approach. You're going to be facing some of the most decorated warriors in the galaxy. Champions who have trained in combat disciplines refined over thousands of years, who have competed across dozens of tournaments, who have never lost a match in their careers. Does any of that concern you? No, she said. My eye membranes actually spasmed. In 17 cycles of interviewing champions before their matches, I had received many answers to that question, boastful answers, philosophical answers, strategic deflections, elaborate performances of fearlessness. I had never received a simple, quiet, completely unadorned no. Can you elaborate on that? I asked. She considered the question for a moment, then shrugged, a small rolling motion of her shoulders that seemed to dismiss the entire premise. Fighting is fighting. Doesn't really matter how tall someone is or what planet they are from. Either you can fight or you can't. I almost laughed. The naivety was so complete, so earnest, that it had crossed some threshold into something almost endearing. And you believe you can fight? I know I can fight, she said. No pride in it. No aggression. Just the same calm, matter-of-fact tone she might use to note that water was wet. Before I could formulate another question, the floor shook. Gormith had crossed the staging area and was now standing directly over Victoria Torres, reducing her to a small figure at the base of the mountain. She tilted her head back to look at his face without stepping away. You, he said, his voice dropping to a register that rattled the equipment cases nearby, are going to suffer in that arena. Your pride will be destroyed. Whatever foolish confidence brought you here will be dismantled, piece by piece, in front of the entire galaxy. Do you understand me, little human? Victoria looked up at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was not a reassuring smile. It was not aggressive, not defiant, not theatrical. It was small and quiet and contained something that made a deeply uncomfortable sensation move through my midsection, the feeling you get when you realize you have fundamentally misread a situation. Okay, she said simply. Just that. Okay. The way you acknowledge a weather report about mild cloud cover. Gormith blinked. He had delivered that speech. I knew from his profile that he had delivered versions of it before every significant match, and the expected responses were fear, anger, bluster, tears, or some combination thereof. He fed on those responses. They confirmed his dominance before the fight even began. Instead, he had received calm acknowledgement and a smile that he clearly did not know what to do with. He snarled something in Vrexian that my translator struggled to render, then turned and walked away. But as he went, I noticed something that I filed away carefully in my memory. The swagger in his walk was fractionally less certain than it had been when he crossed the floor toward her. That didn't concern you at all? I asked. She watched him walk away with an expression of mild, almost academic interest. Should it have? His 3 times your size, I said. 47 consecutive wins. Good for him, Victoria said, and then turned back to me with a directness that caught me off guard. Can I ask you something? Of course. When does the first match start? I want to get through this. I have dinner plans. The staging area was not quiet. There were too many beings, too much equipment, too much pre-match energy for true quiet. But somehow those 3 words landed in a pocket of relative silence, and several nearby beings who heard them went very still. Valura, who had been floating at a discreet distance observing the entire exchange, flickered with what I was fairly certain was disbelief. The first match begins in 1 standard hour, I said slowly. The preliminary draw will assign opponents randomly. You could face anyone. Sounds fair, Victoria said. She walked to an empty corner of the staging area, settled onto the floor in a cross-legged position, closed her eyes, and within approximately 30 seconds appeared to simply be resting, shoulders relaxed, breathing slow and even, entirely removed from the noise and tension surrounding her. I drifted back to Valura. She has dinner plans, I said. I heard, Valura confirmed. She genuinely thinks this is a minor errand. Apparently. We looked at each other. Or rather, I looked at the luminous cloud that constituted my co-commentator's presence, and she rippled in what I had learned over many years to interpret as a shared, slightly uncomfortable silence. This, I said finally, is going to be painful to watch. The preliminary draw results posted 40 minutes later, and I laughed for a genuinely uncomfortable amount of time when I saw Victoria's first opponent. Corvix the Destroyer. Not merely a champion, a legend. A Thaxan warrior whose title was not ceremonial but descriptive, earned in a match where he had faced 6 opponents simultaneously and systematically ended every single one of those fights. He possessed 4 arms, each one capable of independent coordinated action, along with mandibles that could shear through structural steel and a reaction speed that seemed to violate several reasonable assumptions about physics. He weighed just over 200 kilograms and had never, in 63 matches across 9 tournaments, come close to losing. The Univice, I decided, had an absolutely savage sense of humor. The grand arena of Station Zephyr 9 was 100 meters in diameter, its floor made of reinforced composite material capable of withstanding impacts that would collapse a standard structure. The ceiling opened to a panoramic view of open space, contained only by an energy shield that kept the atmosphere in while leaving the stars perfectly visible. In 17 cycles of tournaments, I had stood in this commentary booth for hundreds of matches, and I had never once seen every single seat filled before the opening bell. Tonight, every seat was full. Word had spread through the station with a particular velocity that only genuine collective absurdity can achieve. Every being in the station, it seemed, wanted to watch whatever was about to happen to the human. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations, I announced, my voice amplified throughout the arena, welcome to the preliminary round of the Galactic Combat Trials. Our first match is going to be memorable. I can personally guarantee that. I paused for effect. In the red corner, weighing in at 207 kilograms, with a record of 63 wins and 0 losses, the pride of Thaxia Prime, Corvix the Destroyer. The crowd erupted. Corvix entered the arena with 4 arms raised, mandibles clicking in a pre-fight ceremonial rhythm, eyes blazing with the focused intensity of a being who had never encountered a problem he could not solve with overwhelming physical force. He was genuinely terrifying to observe, a concentrated argument for the theory that evolution is, at its core, a competition to produce the most effective violence. And in the blue corner, I continued, making her Combat Trials debut, representing humanity and the planet Earth, Victoria Torres. Victoria walked into the arena to laughter. Not scattered laughter, universal, unanimous, unrestrained laughter from thousands of beings across dozens of species who had looked at the situation and arrived at the same conclusion. This was not a fight. This was an educational experience for one of the participants. She did not acknowledge the laughter. She walked to her starting position, rolled her shoulders once, shook out her hands, and settled into her stance. Weight distributed carefully, knees slightly bent, hands relaxed but ready, and those dark, calm eyes fixed on Corvix with an expression of complete, undisturbed attention. Begin! Corvix crossed the arena in 4 strides. He was shockingly fast with his mass, all 4 arms extended to grab, wrap, and end this within the first 10 seconds. The crowd leaned forward as one organism, already preparing a collective reaction to the inevitable. Victoria moved, not backward, not sideways in panic. She shifted her weight with a precision that looked almost lazy, angled her body at the last possible moment, and Corvix's 200 kilograms of elite combat-trained mass sail passed her like a transport vessel that had miscalculated its docking vector. His momentum carried him forward, and he had to dig his rear legs into the arena floor to avoid crashing into the perimeter wall. The crowd went silent, not the polite quiet of an attentive audience. The stunned, disoriented quiet of thousands of beings who had just watched their expectations evaporate. Corvix turned around. His mandibles clicked in a rapid pattern I recognized a confusion, the specific, insulted confusion of someone who has never had to ask the question, how did that happen? He charged again, more controlled this time, trying to use a superior reach to corner her against the arena perimeter. Victoria watched him approach, took 2 deliberate steps to her left, then dropped suddenly low and swept his leg with the outside of her own foot. The movement was small, precise, almost surgical. Corvix stumbled. 200 kilograms of elite warrior stumbled. The gasp from the crowd was audible across my communication equipment. What is she doing? Valora asked quietly beside me. I have genuinely no idea, I said, leaning forward so far I was in danger of pressing my face against the barrier screen. Corvix abandoned technique. Whatever combat strategy he had prepared dissolved into pure aggression, all 4 arms swinging in overlapping arcs designed to catch Victoria regardless of where she moved, a pattern that should have been physically inescapable. It had ended fights in under 3 seconds. I had watched the recordings, but she was no longer where she had been. She slipped under the first arm. She twisted past the second. She used the momentum of the third to spin herself around his body, and then she was on his back, her legs locking around his torso, one arm wrapping around his thick neck, repositioning with a speed and surety that looked less like fighting and more like water finding its natural level. She was not choking him. Phaxians breathe through a distributed respiratory system that a standard chokehold cannot effectively compress. She understood this, somehow, and instead controlled his head, applying rotational pressure to his neck and upper spine with a leverage that looked, even from the commentary booth, genuinely painful. Corvix thrashed. He grabbed for her with all four arms, but she had positioned herself precisely in the dead zone of his reach, adjusting with each attempt, staying centered on his back like she had been there before, and found it comfortable. He slammed himself backward into the arena wall. The impact registered on the structural sensors as a significant collision event. Victoria grunted. A short, sharp sound. Pain acknowledged, processed, and filed. She did not let go. He slammed himself again. Then again. On the third impact, something cracked sharply enough that I heard it through the arena's audio system, and for a terrible fraction of a second I thought I was watching a human spine fail under forces it was never designed to endure. Then I saw the mandible. One of Corvix's mandibles had fractured, not from Victoria's hold, but from the force of his own face colliding with the arena wall as he tried to crush a creature who simply refused to release her grip. The crowd had gone completely silent. 4,000 beings across dozens of species, watching in absolute collective stillness as the greatest active champion in tournament history became progressively slower, progressively less coordinated, progressively more desperate under precise, patient control of a small human being who had arrived at this tournament with dinner plans. Then Corvix's primary hand dropped to the arena floor. 3 deliberate taps. The universal submission signal. The referee called the match immediately. Winner, Victoria Torres. The arena held its silence for approximately 5 full seconds after the call. Then it exploded. Not in the clean, joyful pandemonium of a beloved champion's victory, in the chaotic, fragmented noise of thousands of simultaneous conversations, arguments, and recalibrations of reality. The betting pools, I was informed through my secondary data feed, had crashed entirely as the system tried to process the implications. Victoria released Corvix and dropped to the arena floor. Corvix collapsed to his knees, breathing in ragged pulls, one mandible hanging at the wrong angle, staring at the arena floor with the expression of a being whose fundamental assumptions about the universe have just been reorganized without his consent. Victoria walked to him. She extended her hand, palm forward, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect that the trial's database identified as an Earth cultural convention. He stared at her hand. Then, slowly, he reached out with one trembling arm and gripped it. She helped him, gently, to his feet. "That was a good fight," she said clearly. The arena microphones caught every word. "You're very strong." She turned and walked out of the arena, leaving Corvix standing there with his broken mandible and his unbroken record that was now definitively broken. I sat in my booth for a long moment without speaking. Valura was flickering in a rapid, complex pattern that I had never seen her use before, the visual equivalent of a mind trying to process several incompatible things simultaneously. "Kaddish," she said quietly. "I know," I said. "What did we just?" "I don't know," I said, "but I'm going to find out." Over the following matches, a pattern emerged. I call it a pattern because I do not have a better word for something that was simultaneously completely consistent and completely incomprehensible. Victoria fought Crayon the Silicate. Every analysis model, every commentator, every being in the station who had an opinion agreed on one fundamental fact. You cannot hurt someone made of living rock. Physical force bounces off. Standard submission holds fine no purchase. You simply cannot apply sufficient pressure to a mineral matrix to compel submission. Victoria did not try to hurt him. She watched him move for 90 seconds, cataloging his gait, his balance distribution, the particular way his crystalline joints managed weight transitions. Then she swept his leg, a precise strike to a joint articulation point, and got him to the ground. She spent the next 3 minutes controlling his position with holds that prevented him from leveraging his density, keeping him off balance, making every attempt to rise cost more energy than he recovered. He eventually yielded out of pure, genuine frustration. Not pain. Frustration. She had made the living rock structure feel helpless. She fought Lexaria, the Zenthri twins. Lexaria was, by several objective measures, the most physically capable being in the tournament, able to shift her body density at will, effectively boneless when she chose to be, capable of flowing around any hold. Victoria lost the first 30 seconds of that fight badly, absorbing several strikes that sent biological distress alerts to the medical team monitoring her vitals. Then she changed tactics completely, grabbed Lexaria during a density transition, locked her into a hold that functioned as a mechanical trap rather than a strength contest, and applied leverage to Lexaria's arm with such precise anatomical understanding that the Zenthri tapped before anything dislocated. She fought a Nephilim warrior. Everyone agreed this was impossible. You cannot grapple with ionized gas. Victoria spent several minutes observing how the Nephilim maintained its cohesion near the arena floor, identified that the electromagnetic fields sustaining its form were interacting with the metal composite beneath them, and used this to her advantage in a way that forced the warrior to choose between maintaining combat capability and maintaining physical integrity. The Nephilim yielded before anyone fully understood what she had done. Match after match, every opponent brought a different body plan, a different combat tradition, a different set of physical properties. Every opponent she had not faced before, and every time, the same sequence played out. Victoria observed, Victoria adapted, Victoria waited for the precise moment that her opponent's strength became their vulnerability, and then she ended the fight with the quiet efficiency of someone completing a necessary task. After the fourth match, the laughter in the arena stopped completely. After the fifth, something took its place that took me several minutes to identify. I had heard that particular quality of silence before, at disaster simulations, at the announcement of political upheavals, at the moments when reality demonstrates that it does not particularly care about your prior assumptions. It was a sound of fear wearing the polite mask of attention. Between matches, I did what I should have done from the beginning. I researched. The Federation database on Earth was embarrassingly thin. 5 cycles of membership had generated relatively little documentation, because most species, frankly, had not bothered to learn much about humanity beyond the basics required for diplomatic protocol. But what existed in that database, once I read it carefully, made me set down my beverage and sit in complete stillness for approximately 4 minutes. Earth's gravity was measurably higher than 70% of Federation member worlds. This meant that every human being born on Earth developed under conditions that the rest of the galaxy would classify as a light resistance training regimen, sustained, lifelong, beginning from birth. Victoria Torres, weighing in at 70 kilograms and measuring 1.7 meters, was not a small, fragile creature from a low-gravity world. She was a dense, efficient physical system that had been built by a planet that never allowed its inhabitants to be comfortable. But the gravity data was almost incidental. The critical information was evolutionary. Humans are not prey species. They were never prey species. Their ancestors were pursuit predators, a hunting strategy so exhausting, so demanding, so completely unlike anything else in the galactic biological record that I had to read the entry 3 times to accept it. They chased their prey on foot, 4 hours, sometimes for days, until the prey, unable to regulate its own body temperature under sustained exertion, collapsed from heat exhaustion. Humans can sweat, an active cooling system almost entirely unique among complex organisms, allowing them to maintain functional body temperature under levels of exertion that would kill most species. They do not stop. They are not built to stop. Their entire cardiovascular and musculoskeletal design is optimized for one fundamental purpose: to keep moving long after everything else has stopped. And then there was the combat history. Mixed martial arts did not develop in a gymnasium. It developed across millennia of humans studying how to harm other humans, in wars, in formal duels, in street confrontations, in the brutal informal crucibles of populations that had no access to energy weapons or technological advantages, and so refined, across thousands of years, the pure mechanics of what one human body could do to another. They had disciplines for striking, disciplines for throwing, disciplines for controlling a larger opponent on the ground, disciplines for finding the precise anatomical point where leverage became absolute and size became irrelevant. They had studied violence the way other species study music or mathematics, not because they were violent by nature, but because their environment demanded it, and humans, above all else, are the species that learns. I was still processing all of this when I made my way to the staging area for the semifinal matches, and I saw Gormeth, the Vrexian champion who had mocked Victoria Torres when she first arrived, whose voice had led to laughter in the staging area, whose boot had been immortalized in a meme, was standing near the entrance tunnel, fully armored, weapons secured, absolutely still. He should have been in motion, working through his pre-match preparation, channeling the aggressive focus that had carried him to 47 consecutive victories. Instead, he was staring at Victoria, who sat in her customary corner with her eyes closed, breathing with the slow regularity of someone in a light meditative state. Gormeth looked terrified. I approached him with my recording drone, choosing my words carefully. "Gormeth, one match from the finals. How are you feeling?" He did not look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the small human across the room. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About what?" "About her." A long pause. "About all of them." I waited. "We thought humans were weak because they were small," he said, "because their planet only recently developed space travel, because they seemed so eager to be friendly, always asking questions, always wanting to learn, always smiling and shaking hands and making alliances." He exhaled slowly. "We looked at all of that and we saw fragility. We saw a species that needed us, needed our technology, our protection, our guidance. We thought they were kind because they had no other option." He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was something I had genuinely never encountered in 17 cycles of watching warriors prepare for battle. "They are not weak," he said. "They are choosing to be kind. Do you understand the difference?" I considered it. "I think so." "A weak being has no choice," Gormeth said. His voice had dropped to just above a whisper. "They must be diplomatic because they cannot survive otherwise. But humans—" He laughed, and the sound was hollow and strange, nothing like his earlier laugh in the staging area. "Humans survived their own planet for millions of years. They outlasted ice ages and mass extinctions and the complete ecological hostility of a world that never once made things easy for them. They are not being peaceful because peace is all they are capable of." He paused for a long, waited moment. "They are being peaceful because they decided to be, because they looked at the galaxy and chose cooperation over conquest. And that," he said, his voice barely audible, "is the most terrifying thing I have ever understood about another species." His match was called before I could respond. He walked into the arena like someone carrying a weight that had not been there this morning. He fought the Chlorian Berserker and won, but barely, distracted, his head pulled back repeatedly to the tunnel where Victoria was warming up for her semifinal. He won on physical superiority and 17 cycles of muscle memory, not on presence or focus. Victoria's semifinal against Dexlor, the Centurion speed specialist, lasted 2 minutes. Dexlor landed 3 strikes that sent the medical team's monitoring equipment into distress alerts. Victoria absorbed them, closed the distance, and applied a submission hold so technically precise that Dexlor yielded before she applied full pressure, tapping out not to pain but to the cold recognition that the position was inescapable and full force would mean structural damage. The finals were set. Victoria Torres versus Gormeth. The human versus the Vrexian. The figure in simple training clothes versus the 3-meter armored champion. The being who arrived with dinner plans versus the warrior whose entire identity had been constructed from conquest. The gambling pools gave up attempting to set meaningful odds. The broadcast notification went out to 400 member worlds. The arena capacity, already exceeded, found additional violations of recommended maximum occupancy as being crowded onto every available surface. I had been doing this job for 17 cycles, and I had never been genuinely uncertain about an outcome before. I was uncertain about this one, not about the fight. I had developed some theories about that, but about what the fight meant and what it was going to mean afterward, and whether the galaxy was prepared for either answer. The championship match began with a silence that felt owned. Gormeth entered the arena first, and the crowd's response was muted in a way that would have been unthinkable 12 hours earlier. He walked to his position with mechanical correctness, every movement proper, every piece of armor in place, every weapon secured. He looked magnificent. He looked like a champion. He did not look certain. Then Victoria walked out of the tunnel, and the crowd did not cheer, did not laugh, did not make much sound at all. They watched her walk to her starting position with something that had moved past mockery and past fear into a territory that I am not sure galactic culture had a precise word for, the specific, unsettling respect you develop for something you have realized you fundamentally underestimated. She rolled her shoulders, shook out her hands, settled into her stance. They looked at each other across the arena floor. Fighters ready. Gormith nodded. Victoria smiled. That small, quiet, deeply unsettling smile. Begin! And Gormith did not move. The confusion in the crowd was immediate and vocal. Gormith was an aggressor. His entire combat philosophy was built on forward momentum, on overwhelming opponents before they could establish their strategy. Standing still was not in his repertoire. It had never been necessary. Victoria did not move either. She stood in her stance, weight balance, watching him with that patient, complete attention. 5 seconds. 10. 30. The crowd's confusion curdled into restlessness, then into a strange, anticipatory tension. Something was happening, even if nothing was visibly happening. Gormith took one step forward. Victoria's weight shifted fractionally. He stopped. The step had been a test, not a commitment, and she had passed it. They remained in the suspended state, each movement answered by counter-movement, each probe met with precise adjustment, for almost a full minute. I had watched thousands of matches, and I had never seen anything like it. It was not a stalemate. It was a conversation conducted in the language of position and intention. Then Gormith did something that I will remember for the rest of my career. He powered down his weapons. All of them. The energy cells discharged with an audible sequence of diminishing hums. The blades retracted. The tactical systems went dark. He stood in his armor with his hands at his sides, completely unarmed. The crowd's gasp was a living thing. Victoria tilted her head slightly. Curious. Present. Unreadable. You're not going to yield, Gormith said. His voice was quiet, but the arena microphones were very good, and 4,000 beings heard every word. Across the broadcast, so did 400 worlds. No, she said simply. I could fight you, Gormith said. I am larger, stronger, better equipped. I might even win. He paused. But I have been watching you, Victoria Torres. I have watched every match since you arrived. I have watched how you move, how you wait, how you think. Another pause, longer, and I understand now what you are. What am I? She asked. Genuine curiosity in her voice. Not performance, actual interest. You are patient. He said the word like it was the name of something vast. You wait for mistakes. You use our strength against us. You do not win by being stronger than your opponent. You win by being smarter and more durable and more willing to endure than your opponent is willing to inflict. He was quiet for a moment. I cannot beat that. None of us can, because you will absorb everything I do to you, and you will keep moving, and you will wait, and eventually there will be one moment, one small opening, and you will end this fight exactly the way you have ended every other fight. Not dramatically, just completely. No one in the arena made a sound. 4,000 beings in the room, 400 worlds on the broadcast, all holding still. So I have a choice, Gormith continued. I can fight you, and probably lose, and confirm for the entire galaxy what they are already beginning to understand. Or I can say it myself, right now, and let that be the message. He straightened to his full height, 3 meters of Rection warrior, the greatest active champion in tournament history, standing at absolute attention. Humanity has sent a message today, he said. You did not send your most advanced fighter. You did not send someone enhanced or modified or artificially improved. You sent someone ordinary, someone average by human standards. He paused to let that land. Because you wanted us to understand something fundamental. And what's that? Victoria asked. Her voice was very quiet. She already knew, I think, but she let him say it, that every human is dangerous. The words moved through the arena like a slow wave. That your species survived the death world not through luck or circumstance, but because you are genuinely, biologically, fundamentally unkillable. That you are predators who chose peace, who looked at the galaxy and decided that cooperation was worth more than conquest. But you never forgot how to hunt. You never stopped being what you are. He took a long, measured breath. You are patient. You are intelligent. You do not stop coming. And there are 7 billion of you. He lowered himself to one knee and tapped the arena floor 3 times. The referee stared. swallowed. Are you certain? I am certain, Gormaz said. He looked up at Victoria. You win, champion of Earth. Not because you are the strongest being on this floor, but because you are the most dangerous kind of opponent I have ever faced. One who will never quit, never panic, never make a mistake out of anger or pride, and never stop thinking. He paused. We should have known what you were from the beginning. Your own planet tried to kill you for millions of years, and here you stand. The arena exploded. Half of it was cheering. Half of it was something harder to name, the noise of collective reckoning, of a galactic culture updating its understanding of a species it had welcomed with cheerful condescension 5 cycles ago. But I was watching something else. I was watching the other champions, the ones who had not yet faced Victoria, the ones who had been scheduled for subsequent matches, waiting in the staging area feeds, watching the broadcast from the arena floor. One by one, they began approaching the referee station. The Chlorian berserker who had been waiting to avenge his species' earlier loss, the Centurion Speed Specialist tournament partner, the Nephilim Warriors reserve fighter, the second Zentari twin who had watched her sibling yield from up close and spent the subsequent hours very quiet. One by one, they filed withdrawal notifications, not because they feared they would lose, not entirely, but because Gormaz had articulated something that all of them had been processing independently since the first match, and the collective weight of that understanding had become heavier than any individual champion's ambition. Fighting Victoria Torres was not a question of winning or losing. It was a question of what you were willing to pay for either outcome, and the answer, for every being who had watched her work methodically through the bracket, was the same. Not worth it. The referee, looking genuinely lost for the first time in what I suspected was a lengthy career, raised Victoria's hand. You're champion, he said. The uncertainty in his voice was not professional. It was philosophical. The arena didn't know how to respond. This was not how tournaments ended. Champions were crowned in blood and thunder, and the clean catharsis of decisive battle. Not like this. Not in a silence that felt like the entire galaxy quietly revising something it had believed about itself. Victoria looked around at the crowd, at the cameras relaying her image to 400 worlds. She took it all in with those dark, calm eyes. Then she looked at the referee. Can I go? She asked. I really do have dinner plans. She walked out of the arena carrying her championship token, a small crystal that barely caught the light, and left behind 4,000 beings who were all, in one way or another, thinking the same thing. I poured myself the strongest drink available in the commentary booth inventory and stared out at the emptying arena for a long time. Valora drifted beside me, pulsing with something slow and complex that I did not have a translation for. She had been doing this job as long as I had, covering tournaments across 7 different competition series, and she was flickering with a frequency I had never seen from her before. They are never going to let humans compete again, she said finally. Not a question. Would you? I replied. She was quiet for a moment. No, absolutely not. A pause. Not because of what she did, because of what it means. I nodded slowly. She's ordinary, Kaddish, Valora said. Gormaz said it. She didn't disagree. She didn't disagree, I confirmed, which means there are 7 billion more. We sat with that. Down in the arena, the last of the other champions were dispersing. Medical staff were completing their post-match assessments. The cleaning systems were beginning their work on the arena floor. Somewhere on Station Zephyr 9, Victoria Torres were collecting transportation documentation back to Earth, probably already more interested in dinner than in the quiet revolution she had just conducted. She had not come here to prove anything. I was certain of that now. She had come because Earth had been invited to participate, and she was the person they had selected, and it had seemed like an interesting thing to do. She had not arrived with a message, a mission, a strategy to reshape galactic perception of her species. She had arrived with calm eyes and dinner plans, which was, I realized, exactly the point. She was not humanity's finest warrior. She was not their most enhanced or modified or extraordinary example. She was someone who had grown up on a death world, learned to fight because fighting was part of that world's curriculum, and arrived at the most prestigious combat tournament in the galaxy without any particular drama because she was confident in what she knew and untroubled by what she did not know, and that combination, on a species with her biology and her history and her 7 billion fellow survivors, was the most quietly terrifying thing I had encountered in 17 cycles of watching the galaxy's best compete. I started writing my final commentary piece. My first title was "The Day We Learned to Fear Humanity." I deleted it. Too dramatic, too alarmist, too focused on the wrong thing. My second title was "The Day We Learned to Respect Humanity." I kept it because that was accurate, and because respect and fear, when it comes to humanity, might be the same word pronounced two different ways. I thought about the 5 cycles since Earth had joined the Federation, the cheerful diplomacy, the enthusiastic participation in every committee and working group, the ambassadors who asked too many questions and shook everyone's appendages and laughed too easily and seemed so genuinely delighted to be part of something larger than themselves. We had looked at all of that and decided it was a behavior of a species that needed guidance, a young civilization finding its footing in a complex galaxy, grateful for the welcome, aware of how much it still had to learn. We had completely missed what was underneath it. They were not grateful because they were fragile. They were grateful because they were kind, and kindness was a choice they had made deliberately after millions of years of survival had demonstrated that they did not actually require anything from the rest of us. They had joined the Federation not because they needed our protection, our technology, our guidance, but because they had looked at the galaxy and decided it was worth knowing. That was a thought that stayed with me longest. After the arena cleared and Valora said good night and the station settled into its intershift quiet. They chose us, knowing what they were capable of, knowing that they had survived everything their own world had thrown at them. They still looked at the rest of the galaxy and decided that cooperation was more interesting than conquest. For now, I saved my commentary, shut down my equipment, and finished my drink. Outside the transparent barrier of the commentary booth, the stars hung in the same configuration they always had, but they looked subtly different now. The way a familiar landscape looks different once you have learned something new about the ground beneath it. Earth was out there in the unfashionable spiral arm, a blue-green marble that nobody had bothered to look at closely until 5 cycles ago. 7 billion people, every one of them patient, and durable, and fundamentally unkillable, and currently choosing deliberately every day to be the friendly, curious, handshaking, question-asking neighbors who just wanted to be part of something bigger. For now, I thought again, and the words carried a weight I had not felt before. Not because I thought they would change their minds, not because I believed their kindness was performance or strategy, but because I understood now that a species powerful enough to make that choice freely, and wise enough to make it consistently, and old enough to have earned the right to make it willingly, that species was not something you needed to fear. It was something you needed to deserve. The Galactic Federation had welcomed humanity with open arms and mild condescension, certain we were doing them a favor. We had given them membership forms and orientation packets and a seat at tables where the real decisions had already been made. We had never once asked ourselves if we were good enough neighbors for them. Somewhere on Earth, Victoria Torres was having dinner with her friends, telling the story of the strange alien she had met at the tournament, laughing at the good parts, glossing over the painful ones, probably already more interested in the meal than in the quiet, permanent fact of what she had accomplished. She had changed galactic politics today. She had rewritten the Federation's understanding of a species. She had walked into the most dangerous tournament in the known universe with tape on her hands and left with every other champion declining to follow her. And she had dinner plans the whole time. I titled my final section simply, Champion. Then I turned off the light in the commentary booth, walked out into the corridor of Station Zephyr 9, and began, in my own small way, trying to be worthy of the galaxy we had just discovered we were sharing. Tournament concluded. Champion crowned. Life in the galaxy continues. And somewhere on Earth, Victoria Torres is having dinner, completely unaware that she just changed everything. Typical human. Absolutely extraordinary. I had been doing this job for 17 cycles, and I was absolutely certain I had seen everything worth seeing. My name is Kardish. I am what you might call a professional observer of violence, though I prefer the more dignified title of Senior Combat Commentator for the Galactic Combat Trials. If you are somehow unfamiliar with the trials, allow me to paint a picture. 400 different species, each sending their finest warriors to a single arena station floating at the intersection of 6 trade routes, all competing to prove who has the best fighters, the most refined combat philosophy, the most terrifying champions. The broadcast reaches every corner of the known Federation. The gambling pools generate more currency in a single tournament than some planets see in a decade. It pays extraordinarily well. This is because beings across the galaxy, regardless of how advanced their civilization, regardless of how many philosophical treatises they have written about peace and cooperation, absolutely love watching other beings beat each other senseless in the name of honor, glory, and bragging rights. We are all very civilized about it, of course. There are rules. There are medical teams. There are referees trained in the submission protocols of over 200 species. Nobody actually dies in them all. Well, mostly nobody. There was that incident with the Chlorian Berserker last season, but station management has strongly advised all commentary staff not to discuss that on the air. So there I was, standing in the commentary booth overlooking the grand arena of Station Zephyr 9, running through my pre-tournament notes, updating the odd projections of the gambling pools, sipping something warm and mildly caffeinated. Standard preparation. Entirely routine. The Vrexian delegation had arrived with their champion, Gormith, who stood 3 meters tall and possessed fists roughly the size and approximate density of industrial mining equipment. He had won 4 to 7 consecutive matches across 6 different tournaments. When he walked through the station corridors, the floor panels registered the seismic impact. The silicate had sent a warrior named Crayon, a being that was, in the most literal biological sense, a walking rock formation with documented anger management issues. He did not have a combat record so much as a geological survey of destruction. The Zenthuri brought their twin fighters, Lexaria and Vex, who move like liquid mercury given sentient purpose and hit with a concentrated force of plasma discharge weapons. All of it impressive. All of it exactly what I expected. I had my commentary notes half written before they even arrived, because after 17 cycles, the patterns become predictable. Then my datapad chimed with a notification that made me inhale sharply enough to choke on my beverage, spitting it across 3 separate screens in a spectacular arc of wasted liquid. Earth had registered a champion. Earth! I sat there for a full 10 seconds, certain there had been some clerical error, some junior administrator's catastrophic mistake. Because Earth, that small, blue-green marble orbiting an unremarkable star in the unfashionable spiral arm of the galaxy, had only joined the Galactic Federation approximately 5 cycles ago. They were still in the orientation phase of membership. They were still learning which forms to file for interstellar travel permits. Half the Federation Council still called them the new ones with that particular tone that suggested they were charmed but not entirely convinced. Everyone called Earth a death world behind closed doors, in the polite whispers of species who had reviewed the atmospheric and ecological data and quietly decided never to visit. Apparently, on Earth, the environment itself had spent millions of years engaged in an active campaign to destroy everything living on it, and the life on Earth had responded by simply refusing to cooperate with this plan. Every creature, every plant, every microorganism on that planet existed in a constant state of violent negotiation with its surroundings, and now they wanted to compete in the galactic combat trials. I checked the registration 3 more times. Each time, it confirmed the same thing. Earth, Sol System, human representative. Confirmed. I immediately navigated to the gambling pools and found myself staring at numbers that were almost poetic in their cruelty. The odds against the human champion were 5,000 to 1. Not competitive odds. Not underdog with a chance odds. These were the universe has collectively decided this is not a serious situation odds. I watched the number update in real time as more beings placed their wagers. 5,000 became 6,000 within the hour. Memes were already circulating on the station's data networks. I found one almost immediately, a crude illustration of a tiny human stick figure being casually stepped on by Gormith's boot, captioned Earth's champion, estimated duration, 30 seconds. I shared it with my co-commentator before I even finished laughing. Valura floated into the booth a moment later, rippling with pale amusement. She is Nephilim, a species that exists as a self-organized cloud of ionized gas with consciousness, personality, and what I have come to recognize over many years of partnership as an extremely dry sense of humor. Her species does not technically laugh, but they pulse with light and patterns that communicate emotional states with remarkable precision, and right now she was pulsing in a frequency I had come to associate with genuine delight. "Have you seen this?" she asked, her voice crackling warmly through the translation matrix. "They actually showed up." I confirmed, still grinning. Who do you suppose they sent? Some genetically engineered super soldier? A cybernetically enhanced warrior? Someone in a massive mechanized battlesuit? Valora pulsed thoughtfully. Knowing humans, probably someone who is wildly unprepared and does not fully understand what they have gotten themselves into. Do you remember their first diplomatic summit? Their ambassador attempted to physically shake the appendages of every delegate in attendance, including the Kothians, who communicate exclusively through pheromones. The resulting diplomatic incident took 3 cycles to fully resolve. I pulled up the human's registration file, still chuckling. Her name is Victoria Torres. No titles, no honorifics, no descriptors of any kind. Just a name. I scroll further. Home city, Los Angeles, Earth. Combat specialization listed as. I paused. Mixed martial arts. I looked that up. According to the database, mixed martial arts was a fighting discipline that combined elements of striking, kicking, wrestling, and submission grappling, essentially a synthesis of various fighting traditions from across Earth's history, developed in a species that had spent thousands of years studying how to harm each other before they ever developed energy weapons or kinetic shielding.